Welcome to HHH, the podcast where we talk about horrible humans in history.
Thank you so much, Ryder, for that amazing introduction. Hello, everybody. And like Ryder said, you are listening to HHH, the podcast where we talk about horrible humans in history. Shout out to my guest intro, Ryder. He did a phenomenal job and is such a great helper, so we love him. Today, make sure you are liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast with everybody that you know that loves history or loves true crime or happens to love both. Today, we are going to talk about another cult leader. And I know you guys have been missing those cult stories so much since we've talked about Cretonia Morande and Jim Jones. You're just like, I need some more cults. Well, I've got some for you. Today, we're talking about a cult leader that made his followers believe that they were aliens stuck in human bodies. I'm not joking, guys. This was a real cult that there were actual members for. He convinced his followers that a spaceship was going to come and pick them up and take them away to heaven. And then when it didn't actually come, he decided to take some action on his own. Today, we are talking about Marshall Applewhite, the leader of the Heaven's Gate cult. And if you haven't heard about this cult before, this happened in the 1990s. So a lot of my viewers, probably not all of you, but a lot of you were alive during this time period. I was alive during this time period. And I remember hearing about this on the news a little bit, but not that much. So this is going to be a crazy story. You're going to hang on for the ride. Let's get into this. Let's learn about Mr. Marshall Applewhite, the crazy cult leader of Heaven's Gate. Marshall Herf Applewhite Jr., he was a junior, was born on May 17th, 1931 in Spur, Texas, to Marshall Herf Applewhite Sr., obviously, and Louise Weinfeld. His father was actually a Presbyterian minister, which actually caused Marshall Jr. to become very, very religious from a very young age. Even as a child, at the age of 5, he was determined to be a minister for the church. He even walked into a church meeting talking about how he was ready to preach the word of God. This kid was very passionate about church and the word of God and spreading the word of God. He had 3 siblings, and he ended up attending Corpus Christi High School, where he met Ann Pierce, his high school sweetheart. How sweet is that? After graduation, he attended Austin College. While he was at Austin College, he was actually super active in a lot of student organizations. Pretty popular, still pretty religious. And in 1952, he graduated with his philosophy degree and joined the Union Presbyterian Seminary to study theology. He decided that, he was so passionate about religion that he was going to be a minister for the rest of his career. Well, around the same time he started ministering school, he actually married Ann Pierce, so his high school sweetheart. And they ended up having 2 children together, Mark and Lane. It didn't take long, though, for Marshall to change his mind when he started ministering school. As he started learning more about what it would take to become a minister, he changed his mind and decided, you know what? I actually would rather be a professional musician. So he was a baritone singer and actually really enjoyed the music of Handel, the Hallelujah song. That's the guy, Handel, and he loves spirituals. If you've never heard of a spiritual before, I hadn't either, so I wanted to double check to see what the heck that was. It's actually a genre of Christian music that's associated with African Americans and their experience of being held in bondage during the era of slavery. So he really, really enjoyed that kind of music, stuff that they would have sung on the plantations to keep them motivated and their spirits high. So Marshall really loved that kind of music. And while his focus changed to becoming a famous musician, he actually became the music director of one of the Presbyterian churches in North Carolina. And in 1954, he was actually drafted by the United States Army. He was stationed in Austria and New Mexico for a little bit and was a member of the Army Signal Corps. After 2 years in the Army, he was able to leave in 1956, and he enrolled in the University of Colorado. And he graduated with a master's degree in music, mostly focused on musical theater. Once he was done with school, he was ready to take off. He was ready to get this famous career. So obviously he had to move to New York City to become a professional singer. And that became a giant failure. Now, this whole time he's moving his family around to try and seek this goal and seek this fame that he was after. Well, because his career bombed in New York, he actually left and taught at the University of Alabama instead. And he actually became a very popular local star because he actually starred in a lot of musicals locally, and people loved his voice. Like, his voice, I actually got to hear a recording of him singing some opera. He had a gorgeous voice. Like, oh my goodness. I was very shocked because I was hoping I wouldn't like it very much because he's kind of a horrible person, but he had a gorgeous voice. So he became very popular, and he was a really good actor. He even acted with a woman, I can't remember her name because I didn't know who she was, but she became more of a famous actress, and she loved acting with him. She said he was phenomenal and his voice was phenomenal, which was accurate. So if you want to hear a recording of his voice, it is out there, and he was really good. But that career at the University of Alabama and his local fame did not last super long because he was actually caught having a sexual relationship with one of his students. Bum, bum, bum. So you know what happens when you're caught with your students. Well, to make matters worse, and I will remind you, this is the late 1950s, early 1960s. The student he was caught with was a male student. So imagine getting caught with a student, and then in this time period, it was a male student. It destroyed his life, basically, because this was a huge no-no. Like, even if they had been non-student-teacher relationship, it was a very big no-no to express those kinds of desires. And he was a bisexual man in this time where acceptance was not a thing. So with his religious upbringing and his desires to be with men, it caused him a ton of mental anguish and conflict. And he had a lot of self-loathing and a lot of feelings against himself because of this. So obviously, this ended his career at the University of Alabama, but in 1965, his wife also found out about this affair, and they were quickly separated. She went home to her family's house. He kept trying to work. Sorry, guys, I have another cold. I know it's summertime. I shouldn't be getting these things, but anyways, he actually traveled all the way down to Texas to talk to his parents because after being married for 13 years, he just felt like he could no longer live a double life. He couldn't deal with these desires anymore and pretend to stay in a pretend happy marriage. So his marriage was over and drove all the way back to Texas to tell his parents and to come out to his parents. And when he did, his father completely rejected him, basically disowned him. And this hurt him so severely because Marshall really looked up to his father. His father was like his hero, and he just wanted to be like his father. So to have his father reject him, this was something that would hurt him throughout the rest of his life. If you watch interviews with him, you can see that anytime he brings up the word father or talks about his father or anything, his voice cracks and he just gets so emotional every time he talks about it. Also, a lot of videos exist for this case, guys. If you're interested, they are out there. Actual recordings of these people. So I watched recordings of him where his voice was cracking and shaking because he was talking about father. And then after all of this happened, when he was rejected by his family, when he was divorced from his wife, he moved to Houston to serve as chair of the music department at the University of St. Thomas. His students really liked him. He was very charismatic, caring. He was an engaging speaker, and they commented specifically that he was a very stylish dresser. So he also became a choral director of the Episcopal Church and performed with the Houston Grand Opera. So it finally seemed like his life was starting to take shape. It was finally starting to work out, and he finally was getting some of that recognition that he really was looking for. And at this time, he was living as an openly gay man, which at this time period, like I said, it wasn't super accepting, but he had finally accepted that that's what he was and he was going to live that. And he was very open about it. But he actually started pursuing a relationship with a young woman at this time. So I'm thinking he was more bisexual than just gay. But I don't think they really had those terms at the time. So this is what he called it. But he actually pursued a relationship with a young woman, and she would eventually leave him because her family really pressured her into leaving him. And this breakup was devastating for Marshall. So he actually resigned from the University of St. Thomas because he was so depressed and had a lot of mental and emotional issues to deal with at the time that he just could not handle teaching as well. So there are rumors out there that he didn't resign because of this relationship. There are rumors that say he resigned because he had actually had another affair with another male student. So there's conflicting stories as to why he actually left the university, but regardless, he left the university because he was dealing with quite a bit at the time. So in 1971, he actually moved out to New Mexico, where he opened a delicatessen store. His customers actually really, really loved him, but only after 1 year, he decided that he needed to move back to Texas. Now, this is when things start getting juicy. I kind of glossed over his early life pretty quickly, but we're going to start diving into the meat of this story right now. So, it's at this time in his life that he actually starts hearing voices in his head. So on his drive back to Texas, he starts hearing some voices and he starts seeing some strange visions, and he's not sure what to make of these. He said, "It was barely daylight on a Sunday morning. I was driving the green Kiat, a little convertible, got out in the middle of the bridge and screamed to God. You've got to give me some focus or some guts to jump off this bridge because I can't handle this. I just don't want to be here anymore. He had so much pressure, so much depression. He was ready to jump off the bridge. But then he started hearing voices and feeling like God was talking to him. And so he decided not to jump off the bridge and just fight through the depression. Well, around this same time, his father passes away. And although his parents had rejected him and it was devastating to him, the news of his father's death was even more devastating because he wasn't really able to recover that relationship. And like I said, he really looked up to his dad. His dad was his idol, and to hear that he had passed away just made his depression spiral out of control. Because of his depression, he was unable to work and started gathering massive amounts of debt from family and friends. His life went from seeming to be going really, really well to spiraling out of control very quickly. So in 1972, Marshall would meet someone that would change his life forever and send him down the pathway of becoming a cult leader. At the time, this seemed like a very innocent interaction, but this individual, Bonnie Nettles, would change Marshall Applewhite's trajectory forever. Now, Bonnie was a nurse at the time, and there's some confusion or different stories as to how they actually met. So the way Marshall told it was that he was going to visit a friend in the hospital and met Bonnie. Well, Bonnie tells it more of he was in the hospital because he was having heart issues or a mental breakdown because he was hearing voices in his head, obviously. And he's even made claims that around this time period when he met Bonnie, he'd actually had some near-death experiences. And after this near-death experience, supposedly is when he met Bonnie Nettles, who was his nurse. Now, not only was she a nurse, but Bonnie had a really deep interest in theosophy, astrology, UFOs, and biblical prophecies, all kind of like mushed together. So she was really passionate about those different interests. And the two of them quickly became friends because Marshall had also been studying alternative Christian views that had to do with astrology and UFOs and those kinds of things. So those two quickly became friends and very close friends. Bonnie told Marshall that she believed that God had brought him back from death for a reason. She said that he wasn't crazy. He wasn't a failure. The voices in his head was actually God and messengers, alien messengers telling him that he had a purpose and that the only thing that he had been missing in his life was just her. He needed her to help guide him through these messages that he was receiving. So they start feeling so close and so connected that they start believing that they actually knew each other in a past life. Slightly weird, but nothing super crazy yet, right? Like, oh, we knew each other in a past life. A lot of people could believe that. But don't worry, it gets a little crazier. So after being friends for a really long time, Bonnie confessed to Marshall that their meeting had actually been foretold to her by extraterrestrials, and that she convinced him that they both had a divine assignment to spread the word of these extraterrestrials. And now we've officially reached Crazy Town. And obviously he reacted the way that any person would when she starts saying, the voices in your head are actually anointing you to be a new religion, and they're actually aliens speaking to your mind. He reacted exactly how most people would have reacted. He politely excused himself and never spoke to her again. Not just kidding. Oh, no. No. That is not what happened. If he had, we wouldn't have a story to tell. So he actually believed what she was saying. He was like, you're right. The voices in my head are extraterrestrials. You're right, they're aliens. Why didn't I figure this out before? And we are destined to start our own religion. Why haven't we done that? So they became so close, so intertwined, that she even got his haircut for herself, so she could be there to support him in all the ways, including the manly haircut. Now, like I mentioned, he had already started investigating these alternatives in the traditional Christian doctrine and was looking into astrology, so it wasn't that difficult to convince him that aliens were speaking to him and that Bonnie had received a revelation from aliens that he was coming, because he'd already started researching this a little bit himself. So they were both cuckoo for Cocoa Puffs together. So the two of them actually began to live together once Marshall left the hospital, and they lived in a very loving and deep platonic relationship. There was nothing kinky going on there. It was totally platonic, and this is actually the kind of relationship that Marshall said he had been looking for. Like, he had been searching for someone who just loved him deeply and wanted nothing back from him. So he had finally found that relationship with Bonnie. But there was just, there's just one small issue that made this a little tricky. Bonnie was married with 4 children. Yep, that's right. Bonnie was married with 4 children. And, I'm not going to lie, when I heard that, I was kind of like, who was the crazy man that married this lady? Like, did he know what he was getting into? I'm guessing not. But the two of them, Bonnie and Marshall, really believed that they were soulmates. So once her husband noticed that Bonnie was starting to follow Marshall and started living with him, obviously her husband divorced her and she lost all custody of her 4 children, which, if I'm being honest, was probably for the best for everyone in this situation, especially the children, because their mom had lost her marbles. So Marshall officially cut off all of his contact with his family. Bonnie had lost all of her family, so they were now isolated together in this craziness of believing that aliens were talking to their minds. So it seemed like they were, it doesn't seem like they were 2 peas in a pod. She helped really enforce the delusions and the delusional beliefs that he was already starting to develop. Sorry, guys, talking too fast. The delusional beliefs that he was already starting to develop on his own. So those two really enforced each other's delusions, and so it just got worse and worse and worse. Some people even believe that she was the reason his psychological state began to deteriorate so quickly. And I actually agree with that, because after they met, he started getting cuckoo crazy really, really fast. I really think they were feeding into each other's delusions. So the two of them actually opened up a bookstore called the Christian Arts Center that carried a variety of books from multiple different religions. They also opened a venture known as No Place, Know Place, where they would teach classes on theosophy and mysticism. And neither of these ventures actually lasted super duper long. So in February 1973, they decided it was time to share their message with the world. So they started to travel throughout the Western United States, sharing their beliefs with other people. And it didn't go super great. I've tried to picture like showing up to one of their meetings where they're like, yeah, we're going to tell you all about the revelations we've received. We talk to aliens in our mind. I feel like that's a hard selling point, and I don't blame people for not just jumping on board with that one. So this journey throughout the Western United States turned into an intense and often confusing spiritual journey for them. And I put spiritual journey in air quotes. You can't see me doing it, but I'm saying quote unquote spiritual journey because they often ran out of money and had to work odd jobs, even sell their blood to get a little bit of cash. I know there's a bunch of college students out there that did, platelets and that kind of thing, donating. So don't judge them too harshly. I know you're out there. They often lived off of rolls, like literally just eating rolls, and they would camp out. If they did stay in hotels, they often left before they could pay the bill. Like they would just bounce and not pay the bill at all. And in May of 1974, they actually got their first convert in the form of an old friend from Houston, Texas, who had actually been writing them throughout their entire journey. And she actually accepted their teachings after one of the visits that they came by and stopped to see her. So they finally, 1974, have a convert who is going to start following them. By June of 1974, Marshall and Bonnie had actually pretty solidified their belief system. They decided that they had been chosen to fulfill biblical prophecies and that they had higher level minds than other people in the world. I love that they came up with this all on their own. Like, I'm just imagining the conversation like, hey Bonnie, I think we are smarter than all the people. No, not some of the people. I think we're smarter than all of the people. Yes, Marshall. I think I agree with you. We are so much smarter than everyone else. Like, how do you decide that you have, how do you decide that your minds are on a higher level than everyone else? Like, I'm sorry, I shouldn't laugh at these people because they truly believed this. It's just, I don't know how you come to these conclusions. Oh, wait, I do. They were crazy. So anyways, that is what they believed, and they thought it was their job to share with everyone else their higher thoughts, their intelligence, and convince people to come to them. And at this point, I think it's really important to note kind of the attitudes and mindsets of the people in the 70s. There were a ton of people seeking truth and connection with the community. They were using psychedelic drugs. As we learned from Jim Jones' episode, it was the perfect time to start a cult because there were so many people with almost too open minds. Like, they didn't really question things. They were just like, yeah, man, let's go try this place over here. Oh, cool. They're all chill. Let's go try this place over here. Like, There's no like, this seems a little culty. Maybe we shouldn't do this. No, it was just very open-minded, free-spirited. Let's try all the things to find a place where we belong. Not to mention, space travel was just really starting to take off. Get it? Take off. Pun intended. I'm so funny. Anyways, UFOs were a really big thing at this time. So that was kind of where everyone was at. And in the defense of all the people in the 70s, like, people just want a sense of belonging, right? I think we all understand that to a certain extent, where we all just want a community where we feel appreciated and loved. And these cults in the 70s gave people that. Unfortunately, it gave it to them in the wrong place, but Bonnie and Marshall started actually holding meetings where they talked about all of their different beliefs and said, like, I saw one of their flyers that literally said, this metamorphic process will be discussed at a meeting. Like, they're preaching to people, like, come feel belonging. Like, we're going to talk about Christian beliefs and these beliefs and all these beliefs, and we're just going to blend them all together. So with all the open-mindedness of the 70s, people are like, oh, chill, let's go check it out. It's not how they talked. That's how we talked in the 90s. It's fine. So Marshall was really charismatic. He was a super good speaker. People really liked him, and he had a way of making people feel like he really knew them and that he really, really genuinely cared. And at these meetings, Bonnie and Marshall actually called themselves, and I'm not going to lie, I kind of found this super adorable. It's not as adorable later in the story, but at this moment, it was kind of adorable. They called themselves Winnie and Pooh, like Winnie the Pooh. So one was Winnie, one was Pooh. Or they would call each other T and Do, like La Ti Da Do, like from Sound of Music. So those were the names that they used. Yes, cuckoo crazy, but super innocent and cute for crazy people, I guess. He even tells those in the meeting that their ideas sound really crazy. He knows they sound crazy, and they should probably be locked up and thrown into an insane asylum, but encourages those in attendance to, quote unquote, give it a chance. Come live with them under the stars and see for yourselves if it's not true. So he even admits that he knows they sound like lunatics, but he's like, you gotta give it a chance, see if it actually works. So they were Christian, UFO, New Age, high-tech religion. Science fiction meets the Sherwood Forest was a quote from a documentary I watched. Science fiction meets the Sherwood Forest. Because these people, I'm not gonna lie, they were so innocent and so sweet that if they weren't insane, I probably would have liked these people. But they were definitely crazy. So they started believing that you didn't have to actually die to make it to heaven. This became one of their doctrines. So it wasn't actually originally like a suicide cult. It wasn't a sketchy cult. It was very innocent. They just believed a spaceship was going to take you to heaven. You didn't actually have to die. A spaceship was just going to take you to heaven. So many of the people that came to Marshall's cult, which they named Heaven's Gate, were just lost souls looking for some kind of meaning in their life, some form of community, somewhere they could belong. And they were all idealists. Like, they all wanted to be perfect. They were all very high achievers, which is crazy to think about because some of them were like really wealthy businessmen. There was a valedictorian from university that had joined their cult. Like, these people were not just like, not simpletons. I don't believe anyone in the world is just a simpleton, but like, they were really intelligent and really go-getters, and they just really believed in perfection and thought that they needed to be perfect. These were the kinds of people that were attracted to Heaven's Gate. Now, I watched a couple of interviews from experts on cults, and they call cults a community with a trap door, that anybody technically could be caught in a cult if the right things were said to you at the wrong time in your life. So no one ever intentionally joins a cult, and it was the same for these people. Many of them had just gone through a divorce, and like one of the women, that was the first failure she had ever experienced in her life, was she had had a divorce, and she felt very vulnerable. And Marshall, at the right time, said that there's a place for you, that we won't judge you. This is going to be welcoming, and you are always welcome here. So saying the right things at the right time is what convinced these people that, yeah, this is what I need in my life right now. So when you're in a deep, dark hole and someone makes you feel all warm and fuzzy, like they can pull you out of this hole, you're going to follow them. And that's what a lot of these followers in Heaven's Gate kind of were like. Now, Marshall told his followers that they were like caterpillars who needed to be taught how to form their cocoons and to transform into beautiful butterflies so that they could fly. And fly meant like in a UFO to heaven. And he made his followers feel very loved, very seen, and eventually summoned them all to the Colorado mountains. And I want to point out that what seems like love in this situation is actually madness in disguise. This man was nutso. And as he summoned all these people out to the mountains of Colorado, this is when the classic cult tactics would begin. Because I know it's been kind of like rainbows and fluff and just crazy alien talk. This is when we start to get a little culty. So in June 1976, Camp Scene, there's a recording called Camp Scene. It's a home video of this camp that they had. So it follows members of the Heaven's Gate in Colorado. And this camp, like you can go watch this Camp Scene video. This will show the beginnings of the path down towards their ultimate death. So it was in this camp that they all would get the exact same haircuts. Now I'm going to try and describe these haircuts because in one of the documentaries, it was like a 2020 episode, they were showing a bunch of these home videos. And they're like, what do you notice about the followers of Heaven's Gate? And I literally said out loud, they all have nerdy haircuts. And then the interviewer was like, they all have haircuts. Like, so these haircuts, they're short and nerdy looking haircuts. Picture Vector from Despicable Me, you know, the nerdy guy with the orange jumpsuit or whatever. Picture that haircut on every single person, man or woman, it didn't really matter. And that is the haircut they all sported, because that was the haircut of Marshall. That's the one he had, so everybody else had to have it. They all exchanged their colorful clothing for baggy, drab-colored clothes. Sometimes they wore gray uniforms that all matched, because they were supposed to have no genders. No individuality, no genders. Seriously, you gotta see these photos. I'll put some up on my Instagram page so you guys can see, like, there was no individuality for these members, and it gets a little creepy. Like, I'm not gonna lie, it's fairly creepy. Now, every 12 minutes at this camp, they would start a new meditation session and they would sit in silence. And this was the beginning of training them that silence was good, talking was bad. So every 12 minutes, they would start a new meditation and they would just stay silent. Marshall made them believe that if they were silent for an entire day, that they were actually doing really well and they were going to be able to connect much better with those aliens. Now, he actually would give them tuning forks to smack on the ground and like hold against their head to try and attune with the UFOs out in space. Because if you could connect with that higher level, you'd actually start being able to speak with the extraterrestrials. So that's giving you an idea of where we're at, guys. They would spend hours trying to attune to these tuning forks. So, this is how you know it's a cult. They cut you off from everyone who cares about you, and they don't permit you any kind of contact to the outside world because they spent months up in the woods trying to tune to these tuning forks. And they were out there so long that family members started panicking because they could not get a hold of their loved ones and their loved ones just vanished. They thought they had been kidnapped, killed. They didn't know because they just vanished. So the cult separates you from anyone who cares about you. Not to mention, they were living off the quote-unquote donations of some of their followers. Like one of them was a trust fund baby, so they were living off of his trust fund. The other was a millionaire who had successfully owned his own business, and they were just using his funds to pay for everything. So they were required to give up everything, including loved ones, financial freedom, and that kind of thing. So the cult would soon, after months and months out in the woods, would step out of the woods and rent out large houses. The members would slowly move into the house that they were renting at night so the neighbors wouldn't get suspicious, because there was about 48 people living in these houses, and they rented out big, luxurious mansions. And they moved pretty frequently because they didn't want neighbors to get suspicious. They didn't want to get noticed. So they moved throughout Colorado and Texas. So they moved quite a bit. And once people moved into the home, 3/4 of the people wouldn't leave the home until they moved to a new home. So inside Heaven's Gate, people just never left the mansion. They had no contact with the outside world. And they treated the house like a mini spaceship. Freaking crazy. I tell you what. Now, they teach the followers, they being Bonnie and Marshall, teach the followers that a spaceship cannot come to take them to heaven until the followers are pure enough. He promised he would lead his followers to heaven in a UFO, but they had to follow every single one of his instructions. And everyone soon lost any form of free will because, up until that point, they still had a little bit, like deciding when you slept and whatnot. Yeah, no, not anymore. Your time was scheduled for you down to the minute. You were not allowed to have any personal opinions of any kind. Like, you couldn't even be like, this blanket is uncomfortable. No. No opinions of any kind. People were not allowed to speak with each other because if you talk to each other, dissent can happen. So no speaking. Where have we heard this before? I think we've heard about the no talking rule before. Where? With Credonia or Jim Jones, maybe? Yeah. So seems like there's a little bit of a pattern here. The crazy leaders don't want their people talking because you know what that could mean? Free thinking. So silence was the way to go. You also weren't allowed any privacy. And Marshall was quoted to say that in the next level, everybody knows when you go to the bathroom. You leave the door open for a lot of awkwardness if the crew you are working with doesn't know everything that is going on. So they talk about the afterlife like you're going to be in a spaceship and it's a crew, and it's just so crazy. Oh, and did I mention that at this point, Marshall wants to be called Doe. Like Doe is his name. So anyways, they lose any sense of privacy. So if you were showering, there would be other people in the bathroom with you, like either going poopies or brushing their teeth or whatever. You were dictated how you would shower. Like you were limited to a 6-minute shower. They even had rules on how to brush your teeth. They had rules about sex. You couldn't think about it. It was inappropriate. No one could have it. It was just no. Like you couldn't even think. They even had rules. I'm not even joking. They had a rule on how large you could make a pancake. No part of you, even your pancake size, could be different from anyone else. I mean, that's what cults do, right? So they were even forced to use enemas and were forced to fast. If you don't know what an enema is, just think if you've ever gone boating and you like fall down while you're wakeboarding or you're going down a water slide, just think of that. And they all had to do those to cleanse their internal body. I mean, I get some people do that. That's great. But he forced people to do these things. It was weird. Now, Marshall, again, like I said, known as Doe, like Doe, a deer. And yes, they sang songs from the musical as like group projects and things. Oh gosh, it was creepy. There's videos of them singing. It's creepy. Anyways, Marshall would hold very regular meetings to tell his followers about the new telepathic messages he was receiving from the aliens that day, and he needed to pass on that information to them from the next level of existence. Now, these meetings would go on for hours and hours, and they would even gaslight their followers, saying things like, "I think we've proven ourselves to be trustworthy, and if not, it's your fault." That's a literal quote from Bonnie. Bonnie was like, "I think we've proven that we're pretty trustworthy, and if not, it's your fault for not trusting us." And they accused their followers of not measuring up to the standards that they have set, and that was why the alien spaceship wasn't coming, because their followers were just not good enough, and they were just getting so frustrated with how not good they were. Like, the biggest sin that you could commit to Marshall and Bonnie was any kind of sexual thought of any kind. And Marshall was said, quote, "If you are from my father's kingdom, you will know that Jesus was not a sexual creature of any kind." He made everyone wear shirts with double pockets to reduce any emphasis on, lady parts. He made them wear tight blue jeans to reduce any difference between men and women. He even made men report when they had wet dreams and document it and write it down and tell why they thought that they had this dream or what could have possibly turned them on. So freaking weird and so creepy. I don't know why he made them do that. I think he had ulterior motives for that, but it's nasty. And then, not only would he make them record it, the whole group, remember 48 people, would get together and discuss it together on how the person could do better in the future. Oh my gosh, talk about humiliating people to keep them humble so you can keep control over them. Bonnie even suggested tying their arms down or wearing boxing gloves so they wouldn't be tempted to perform, what was it that she called it something, and it was a funny way of calling it. What did she call it? The nighttime itch? That's right. That is what she called it. Oh my gosh. So it was a little intense in their little spaceship of a home. So they were all given a new last name, Odie, like the dog from Garfield. That's the new last name is Odie, which they are told means child of God. They are told they need to become like children to be worthy to move on from this life. He infantilized them, basically made them all small children to be more dependent on him, and he treated them all like small children. There's a video where he's like trying to take a picture, and there's a man that he's talking to, and before I saw this part of the video, I saw another home video of him before he was in the cult. This was him deciding he was going back to the cult, talking to his girlfriend about it. And he had been a software developer, very sharp, very confident young man. Like, he was obviously a very intelligent young man. Well, in this video, Marshall's like, "Where's your true smile?" And he's like giggling like this little kid. And he looks like this child, like giddy that his dad is paying attention to him. It is the weirdest, like, creepiest thing. Oh, guys, I tell you what. Anyways, they couldn't stay secret for super long because they moved houses so frequently and they had to rent out such a large space that they were starting to run out of money. They had used up all of the trust fund. They'd used up all the millionaires' money. So they all started to have to get jobs, which meant interacting with people from the outside, or in the case of their cult's beliefs, they were exposed to quote-unquote humans. Ooh, heaven forbid. Now, they all had made-up names, they made up social security numbers, they wouldn't use bank accounts because they wanted to keep their identities secret as much as possible. And so they would all ride together to work, they would all ride home from work, no interacting with people you didn't have to, no outside social life. And Bonnie and Marshall they kept a log in, log out log. Like when you left for work, you had to check out. And when you came back, you had to check in. And they were still trying to maintain that control over their followers while also sending them out into the world, which is a big, scary thing for a cult. So even with the tight control they had, it didn't stop the men from seeing the quote-unquote scantily clad women, women just dressed in normal clothing, and women from seeing the attractive men. They also couldn't stop the interactions that their followers had to have with quote-unquote humans at work. So for some of the followers, this was kind of a wake-up call. One of the followers who actually had joined at the age of 16 was a waitress, and when she started speaking again, she hadn't spoken for 4 years. And once she started speaking again, it was like her voice woke her up. And I have to tell you this part because it's so creepy. She started having a dream when she started waitressing that everyone around her was getting this sleeping sickness where they would all fall asleep and never wake up. And she knew that if she did not leave this cult, she would also get the sleeping sickness and also never wake up. Now, knowing how this story ends, this is so eerie and so insane. Like, it gives me chills thinking about it, and you'll find out why. We're getting there, but oh my gosh. Somebody was looking out for her for sure. And when Bonnie and Marshall learned about her desire to leave, they didn't actually try and stop her. They just encouraged her to leave because they didn't want dissent spreading throughout the rest of the cult. But many of the people who left the cult, like I mentioned, that one guy came back to the cult. They would come back because they had abandoned everything and were trying to go back into a world where they had no support system. They obviously would want back to where they actually felt loved and supported. So even if people left, a lot of them came back. Some of the followers even abandoned their children to be followers of Marshall and Bonnie. And Marshall would use phrases with these individuals, like, they have to decide where their responsibility lies with their Heavenly Father or those children. Excuse me? Excuse me. That is so freaking manipulative. They should be taking care of their kid. Pretty sure that's what God would have wanted them to do. But they didn't see it that way. They were like, you're right. I need to leave that child. Like, just insanity. In 1983, things started to take an even darker turn in Heaven's Gate. Bonnie actually got diagnosed with cancer. And she's supposed to be an immortal, right? She's an alien. She can't die. And she started wearing a glass eye. She was dying of cancer and she knew it. And this was not going to be great for the cult. So at this point, Marshall and Bonnie had set themselves up basically as gods. So she could not die. It would ruin things because they needed a spaceship to take them away, right? So anyways, Bonnie ends up passing away of cancer at 54 years old. Marshall is suddenly stuck in that depression that he had before. His soulmate was gone and he got so depressed. Not only that, but he became like a hypochondriac, thinking that he was about to die too. And if you thought his screws were loose before, oh, you haven't seen nothing yet. He actually hired a male assistant to help him manage everything since Bonnie was now gone. He needed help. Well, one day he pulled this new assistant aside and said, I can't have you helping me anymore because my vehicle is becoming attracted to your vehicle. Vehicle. Yep, that's what they called their bodies because they were no longer humans. Remember, their bodies were just vehicles to get their space bodies around. Cool. Yep, we're there. It's nuts. So their beliefs on sexuality, you thought they were strict before. Well, they get even more strict because he started becoming attracted to this guy. He's like, nope, gotta fix this immediately. So they believed in no sexuality, no sensuality. So what was the solution going to be? Well, just a warning, this part is a little intense, so I will give you a second to pause this. If you have little ears, you don't want to hear this. So here's your second. You ready? You ready? Because here we go. We're going to do it. They started to enforce self-castration. Yep, you heard that right. They actually rented out a storage unit and put a sign on the outside that said hospital because, you know, it's the sign that really matters about a hospital. So Stephen Terry McCarter, he was age 35, was the first one to volunteer to participate in this. And Marshall and many other followers came to watch. Now, they're not sure how much Marshall actually supported this action, but when the surgery was done by a former nurse who was like, I'm sure I could figure it out. Can't be that hard. Let's try it. When it started to go awry, Marshall actually freaked out and said, you know what? We have taken this way too far. We need to call the police immediately. And for once in their lives, all of his followers said, no, we will not be calling the police. We cannot do that. So Stephen was in so much pain from this surgery. I'm not going to go into details. If you want to know the details, you can look it up. It was bad. He was in so much pain. They took him to the hospital to get treatment. And of course, they used fake names because they didn't want to be traced back. So eventually, they find doctors in Mexico that would be willing to do the surgery for them. There are at least 7 men who went and had this done. The youngest was 25 years old. Marshall got it done himself and actually suffered some complications that caused him severe pain. And you know what? I think he deserved it. And they also found drugs that would limit their sexual desires, so they started taking those as well. Now, this is when the discussion about making themselves an example to others by, offing themselves kind of started happening. They start trying to recruit more followers, and this time they use Star Trek. Star Trek is an example of what their religion is, and it does not go well. Oh, as you can imagine, it did not go well. And I will say that one of these followers, it's ironic, was actually the brother of one of the stars of Star Trek. And we'll talk a little bit more about that later. So I just thought it was ironic that he was trying to preach to people, yeah, it's like Star Trek, with his sister as an actress on the show. So he knew it wasn't real. Anyways, most people thought that they were loony bins. And they also started creating videos for the internet. There are 15 hours of Marshall Applewhite talking about gobbledygook. It's literally just gobbledygook. Also in the videos, he talks about the second coming of Christ and that the outside world is Satan's tool to deceive the people away from the truth, and the devil is everywhere. Again, where have we heard this before? He said the millennium coming was a sign that the world was going to end, because the millennium was coming. We're now in the 90s, and I actually lived through this, and I remember people were freaking out thinking the millennium was going to be the end of days. Why? I don't know. Your guess is as good as mine. I didn't feel that way, but Marshall really felt that way. And Marshall asked his followers one day how they would feel if they could drink some pleasant tasting liquid that would make them go to sleep and they would wake up in the next level of existence. Seriously, what has Kool-Aid ever done to these people? Why can we just leave Kool-Aid out of this? Why? Why must we choose Kool-Aid? Ah, poor Kool-Aid. Well, they had been waiting 20 years for this spaceship to arrive and take them home. So a lot of them were actually kind of like, well, that's actually not a bad idea. To make matters worse, with the millennium coming, the comet Hale-Bopp was actually passing really close by the Earth at the same time. And many conspiracy radio stations, which they listened to, said that there was a UFO following right behind the comet. And obviously the people of Heaven's Gate took this as Bonnie is coming to get us in that UFO, giving them the idea, well, if Bonnie had to leave her body, we must also have to do that to be able to go to her. You can see where this is going. So they start researching euthanasia drugs. And on March 7th, 1997, they start fulfilling their bucket list desires. They go to SeaWorld. They go see Cirque du Soleil in Vegas. They go to a donut shop. On March 7th, they're going to all these places that Marshall wants to show them. On March 21st, when they get back to the mansion, I thought this is a sign of these were really good people. They were just very confused and very misled, because when they got home, they actually started canceling all the garbage pickup. They canceled the gardening upkeep. I'm pretty impressed by that. They really thought things through. They're like, you know what? We don't want these people to have to come to work for no reason. Let's cancel this. And then they recorded farewell videos. And I'm not going to lie, they're pretty creepy, because these people in the videos look almost giddy and excited, and they're so happy and expressing how much they love Marshall, or quote unquote Doe, and how Doe has freed them and opened their minds. It's creepy. They basically were talking like they were all going on vacation or something. It's creepy. You can watch those. I don't recommend it. They're creepy. Then they sign out on their daily log. Remember, there's the sign in, sign out. On their estimated time of return, some wrote a question mark. Some said maybe. Some said hasta la vista, baby. Some said never. And some just left it blank. And on March 26th, 1997, an anonymous call comes in that there has been a mass suicide in a house in Rancho Santa Fe, California. Police actually didn't take it too seriously and didn't really rush out there, but they did send out a few officers just to check it out. And when police entered the home, they found body after body after body, neatly laying on beds, all wearing the same black outfit with matching black Nike shoes with the same purple shroud over their heads. They all looked like they were in the exact same position. So creepy. Can you imagine being a police officer and finding that? Like, so eerie. There were red cups with, can you guess? No, you can't. It's not Kool-Aid. Ha, I tricked you. Ha ha. It was pudding and applesauce next to their bed. They looked for anything that looked like they had been forced to do this. There was coercion, but there wasn't. The house was immaculate. They had cleaned it. Everything looked spick and span, and by each body, there was actually a bag packed with personal belongings, even things like quarters in case they needed to make a phone call, chapstick, photo ID with their actual real names on them, like they were about to go on a vacation. Like, the cops' minds were just so confused. They even found a computer in a computer room that was flashing the message on one of the screens saying, "Red alert. Hale Bop brings closure to Heaven's Gate." Oh. Next to that computer was actually a list showing how everyone was divided into groups and how Group 2 would help Group 1 eat their pudding or their applesauce, and then once they had seemed to pass away, they would get their bodies situated and even put a plastic bag over their heads just to ensure they actually passed away, and then arrange that purple thing over their face. And it had it listed out, and it would show a check mark when they had eaten the pudding or the applesauce, and then an X through the check to show that they had actually passed away and been confirmed dead. So they believed that this actually happened over 3 days. It was a 3-day process. And it's thought that Marshall was the last one because he was the last one found dead, all alone, in the master bedroom, covered with stuff. Everything else in the house was basically empty, but his room was covered with decorations and all fancy. And the police knew immediately that Marshall had been the cause of the death of all of these people. They knew that he had led these people to their deaths. Now, Nichelle Nichols is the actress from the original Star Trek. She was Lieutenant Uhura on the TV show. My sister's middle name is actually Nichelle because of that lady. But her brother was actually one of the people killed. And many other families lost loved ones and were left reeling when they found out their family had lost their loved one without any explanation. They were just found dead. There were 39 people total that committed suicide, but there was one survivor. It was that random person who made the anonymous phone call, and it was Rio D'Angelo. And he was actually interviewed by 2020 in the 90s, and he claimed it wasn't a cult. They all had free will. They weren't forced to do anything. And he even, told that 2020 that Marshall had said his job was to spread the message, so he was not allowed to follow them on their journey. And he provided all the videos of the suicide messages, and they interviewed him, and they even asked, what did you think of the mansion? And he's like, oh, I don't really know, but we did have free will. We could have our own opinions. Okay, well, what was your funnest activity? Oh, well, I don't know. I can't tell you that. He couldn't make a decision for himself. So the lead investigator in this case actually called it a murder-suicide. He said that Marshall was the only one who actually committed suicide. The rest of them were coerced into killing themselves. Now, there was a few survivors of Heaven's Gate, and the ones that got away before it turned into a deadly cult. appreciate their own individuality and warn people that you are the sole protector of your individual spirit, and you need to be careful who you give that power to. Now, the thing I find most interesting about this story is when watching all of the home videos and things, Marshall Applewhite actually seems like a really sweet, kind, caring man. And the people are just so wholesome and good and should not have died the way they did because of the delusions of two insane people. That's what I think makes me so mad, is they were all such wholesome, amazing people that shouldn't have died the way they did. So although this cult wasn't as prolific in killing people like some of the other cults that we've talked about, it still killed 39 innocent people and led them to unnecessary deaths. And that is why Marshall Applewhite is our horrible human in history this week. Now, I know what you're thinking. I know what you're all thinking. You're thinking, Angela, you've done 19 episodes, and you have not once talked about a single Nazi. How is that even possible? Well, guys, I'm going to make your wish come true. Since next week is our 20th episode, I thought it was a great time to finally talk about a Nazi, since everyone knows they are the most horrible humans in history. So next week, we'll be talking about Ilse Koch. That is right. We will be talking about a woman. Bet you didn't see that one coming. She was known as the Witch with a B. Sorry, I don't swear. She was the Witch of Buchenwald. Buchenwald? I can't say it. Buchenwald? It was a concentration camp near Weimar, Germany. She was ruthless and enjoyed seeing people tortured. So be sure to listen in next week to find out what makes her such a horrible human in history. Be sure you're liking, subscribing, and sharing this podcast, and we will see you guys next week.